Welcome, friends. In this episode, we will hear the story of William, the human man who shielded the Queen, and Maya, the alien queen. Sit back and enjoy the story. Happy viewing. William had crossed 4 star systems, endured 2 customs interrogations conducted entirely in interpretive humming, and eaten something on the transit moon that he was reasonably certain had still been alive when the vendor handed it over. All so that he could stand here, wedged shoulder to shoulder among 1,000 strangers, understanding roughly 1 word in 5 and none of the important ones. The temple had been carved straight into the flank of the mountain, an entire cathedral of black stone hollowed out by hands or tools, or possibly extremely patient geology. Torches lined every ledge, and their light did something peculiar to the air, which William eventually realized was not smoke, but a fine drifting pollen the pilgrims released from little clay bowls, so that the whole courtyard shimmered gold and breathed like a living thing. His translator earpiece, a second-hand model he'd bought off a man whose eyes did not point in the same direction, kept insisting the ceremony was called asterisk, the homecoming of light asterisk, then reconsidering and offering the onion festival, then giving up entirely and playing what sounded like distant harp music, which was not helpful but was at least pleasant. He had come for the view. That was the honest, unglamorous truth of it. William was the sort of person who read a single line in a travel guide. The mountain temples of the outer reach are said to move even the coldest heart, and promptly spent his last real savings getting there, because he had a cold heart that he suspected needed moving and no better plan for the moving of it. He had no title, no companions, no purpose grander than curiosity and a backpack containing 3 shirts and a water filter. He was, by every measure that mattered to the crowd around him, nobody. He found this restful. Then the drums started, and the crowd went silent all at once, the way a held breath goes silent, and the procession came. She walked at its center beneath a canopy held by 4 attendants, and William's first thought, before awe, before anything sensible, was that someone had made a mistake and let a person who looked entirely too radiant to be real out into public without a warning label. The ceremonial light caught her skin and turned it a deep, glowing mauve, luminous as a dawn seen through water, and William understood in a dazed, uncomplicated way that he was looking at the Queen. Maya. He knew her name only because the whole courtyard breathed it as she passed, a single syllable multiplied by 1,000 mouths. The only thing that marked her as not quite what he'd expected were her ears, drawn up to delicate points, catching the torchlight at their tips. Everything else about her was simply, devastatingly, a woman, and a woman who carried a crown as though it weighed nothing, which meant, William guessed, that it weighed a great deal. He would tell himself later that he saw the blade because he was paying attention. This was a lie he would grow fond of. In truth, he saw it because he was staring at the Queen and the assassin happened to be standing between him and her, and the torchlight ran down the edge of a knife the way water runs downhill, fast, certain, impossible to unsee. There was no time to shout. He wasn't even sure he knew the word for asterisk knife in their language, and look out would have arrived through his malfunctioning earpiece as either a warning or an invitation to a second onion festival. So William did the single most foolish thing a tourist has ever done on a planet not his own, a thing so profoundly against his own interests that he'd have laughed if he'd had the breath. He threw himself forward, into the narrowing gap, into the path of a strike that had absolutely nothing to do with him. The blade found him instead of her. It went in below the ribs with a cold that was somehow worse than pain, a sensation like being told very bad news by his own body. The courtyard tilted. Somewhere a woman screamed and somewhere else a man was already running, and the golden pollen kept drifting down over everything, indifferent, beautiful. William's knees decided without consulting him that they were finished, and he folded toward the black stone at the Queen's feet, one hand pressed uselessly to his side, thinking, with the strange clarity of a man watching his own last savings disappear. Well, that's the coldest heart problem solved. He expected the ground. He did not expect her. Maya was there before he landed, crown and canopy and dignity all forgotten, kneeling in the pollen and the spreading dark, catching the stranger who had bled for her without knowing a single thing about her but the shape of the light on her skin. Her hands found his face. Her eyes, close now, terribly close, were the last thing he saw clearly, wide and stricken and searching his, as though she were trying to memorize a man she had never met and had already, somehow, decided not to lose. "Why," she said, in a language his broken earpiece chose, for once to translate perfectly, "would you do that?" William, who had crossed 4-star systems to feel something, smiled up at her with the last of what he had. "Honestly," he managed, "no idea, seemed rude to just watch." Then the gold went dark. William woke to a ceiling that had clearly been designed by someone with a great deal of money and a serious grudge against blank space. Every inch of it was carved, vines, stars, small solemn animals engaged in what appeared to be a border dispute, and painted in colors his eyes hadn't fully agreed to yet. He stared at it for a while, mostly because turning his head seemed like a project he wasn't funded for. The pain arrived a moment later, polite but firm, a dull throb below his ribs that reminded him, in case he'd forgotten, that he had recently attempted to catch a knife with his torso. He remembered the courtyard. He remembered the gold light and the drums and the queen's face very close to his, and a question he hadn't been able to answer. He remembered deciding this was a bad idea roughly 1 heartbeat after it had become irreversible, which was, he reflected, the story of most of his life. "You're awake," said a voice, and it was hers. He got his head to turn. Maya sat in a chair beside the bed that was far too small and plain for someone wearing what William could only describe as asterisk architecture, and she had clearly been sitting there long enough to be embarrassed about it. In daylight, or whatever the honeyed glow pouring through the tall windows was, her skin held its mauve luminescence more softly, less like a dawn and more like the inside of a shell. Her ears tipped up at the ends, catching the light. She looked, he thought, like someone who had rehearsed several dignified things to say and forgotten all of them. "I want to start," William said, "by apologizing for whatever I said at the end there. I have a policy of never trusting a dying man's material. No editing time." Something flickered across her face that might have been the ghost of a laugh, immediately arrested. "You said it seemed rude to watch." "That does sound like me, solid. I'll allow it." She didn't smile, quite, but the not smiling took visible effort. Then the effort won, and her expression closed into something more formal, more careful, the face of a woman about to deliver news she'd been dreading. William had received a lot of bad news in his life and had developed an instinct for its approach. He braced. "There is something you must understand about what you did," Maya said. "Among my people, a life freely offered for the crown is not a debt. We do not repay it. We cannot. It is considered," she paused, and he could hear her choosing the word the way you choose a step across a river, "a asterisk binding. Your fate and mine are now joined. By law, by the oldest law we have." William waited for the translation to catch up, decided it already had, and said, "Joined how exactly? Because I want to be clear, I'm still hoping this ends with me getting my backpack back." "Joined," she said, "as in you cannot simply leave. As in the law regards your life and my reign as a single thread. As in," she stopped, and something almost helpless crossed her face. "As in I have spent the entire morning failing to find a section of that law which lets me undo it, and I am the asterisk queen asterisk, and I am extremely good at finding things." There was a silence. Golden light moved on the ceiling. One of the carved animals, William noticed, appeared to be losing its border dispute badly. "So to summarize," he said slowly, "I flew across 4-star systems, spent my last real money, ate something that fought back, all to look at a nice view, and I've accidentally married the government." "It is not," Maya began, with the sharp reflex of someone who has explained this concept before, and then stopped, because the word her ancient sacred law used, and the word William's broken earpiece had chosen were apparently close enough to be genuinely mortifying. Her mauve skin did something at the cheeks that William was fairly sure was a blush, which was a detail he decided to file away and treasure. It is not asterisk that. It is older than that. It is a bond of shared destiny. Custodianship. You are meant to stand beside the crown, to be trusted by it and to be its trust. And the earpiece keeps saying married. Your earpiece, Maya said with feeling, is an instrument of chaos and I would like it destroyed. It also thinks last night was the Onion Festival. I've stopped arguing with it. That did it. The laugh escaped her before she could catch it, a real one, surprised out of her, quickly smothered but not quickly enough. And William felt an absurd private triumph, as though he'd caught something rare and let it go on purpose. A queen, laughing, in a plain little chair beside a stranger she'd been kneeling over in the blood dark 12 hours ago. It rearranged something in the room. I don't know your world, he admitted, quieter now. I don't know your laws or your court or the first thing about what standing beside a crown is supposed to look like. I came here to feel something, and mostly I've felt a knife. I'm nobody, Maya. You should know that before you go binding your fate to me. I'm genuinely, professionally, no one. She looked at him for a long moment, and the amusement in her face gave way to something steadier and harder to name. A nobody, she said, stepped into a blade meant for me in a courtyard of 1,000 people who owe me everything, and not one of them moved. Whatever you are, William, I would be careful calling it nothing. She rose, and the architecture rose with her, and at the door she paused. Rest. The court will want to meet the man fate chose for their queen. They will hate you immensely. It will be very educational. Can't wait, said William to the sailing, to the losing animal, to the strange new shape of his life. And alarmingly, he found he half meant it. The court hated him immediately, which William appreciated for its efficiency. There was no warming-up period, no polite interval of feigned welcome before the daggers came out. The moment he was well enough to walk, they simply began all at once, like a single organism that had been waiting for its cue. He was given clothes first. This was framed as a courtesy and functioned as an insult, because the garments were exquisite and rendered him, a man who owned 3 shirts and a water filter, into a walking demonstration of how badly a fine thing could sit on the wrong frame. He kept catching his reflection in the palace's polished black surfaces and doing a small double take, as though a stranger had wandered into the mirror wearing his face and a fortune's worth of embroidery. Then he was presented. This was worse. The great hall had the same drowned honey light as everywhere else in the palace, pouring down through high windows onto a floor so glossy it seemed to hold a second, upside-down court beneath it. The nobles stood in careful constellations, and William understood without being told that where a person stood in this room was a sentence written in a language of precedence he could not read but could absolutely feel. He was walked to the front. He could hear the room rearranging its opinion of him with every step, 1,000 tiny recalculations, none of them favorable. At the center of the unfriendliness stood a man who was clearly its author. He was tall in the way that seemed rehearsed, mauve skin drawn over a face that had been assembled from all the sharpest available parts, and he wore his displeasure like a very good coat, tailored, expensive, meant to be noticed. When Maya named him, the earpiece for once cooperated. Lord Adrian, she said, of the Western Holdings. He has served this court a long time. He has, said Adrian and bowed to her, with a precision that made the gesture somehow an accusation. His eyes moved to William and performed a slow, thorough appraisal, the kind you'd give a stain on something valuable. And in all that service I have never seen the sacred binding invoked by an asterisk off-worlder asterisk, a traveler, a man with no house, no line, no name that means anything on any world I know. He smiled. It was a beautiful smile, and it belonged in a trap. Tell me, William, what does one call you where you come from? William, said William. A ripple went through the nobles. Adrian's smile didn't move. That is a first name. It's the one I use most, saves confusion. He let the silence sit a beat, then added pleasantly, "You'd be amazed how much you don't need a house or a line to catch a knife." Turns out the knife doesn't check. It landed. He saw it land, a flicker in the room, a few nobles glancing at Adrian to see how he'd take it, which was the important thing William was learning. In a court like this, the only real currency was who was watching whom. Adrian had walked in owning every eye in the hall. He'd just been made to share. Adrian recovered smoothly because men like Adrian always did. Bravery, he allowed, is not the same as belonging. A dog will take a blow for its master. We do not seat the dog at the table. He turned the smile on Maya now, and it changed shape entirely, becoming something warmer and older and far more dangerous. "Majesty, I only worry for you. This binding was meant for our own, for someone who understands what standing beside the crown requires. Someone who might have stood there by choice and by worthiness rather than by an accident of geometry." And there it was. William watched the thing beneath the thing's surface for just a moment, the particular heat in by choice, by worthiness, and understood, with the clarity of a man who has nothing to lose and therefore nothing clouding his vision, that Lord Adrian had wanted to stand where William was standing. Had perhaps expected to, had quite possibly made plans. Maya's voice when it came was cool as the black stone underfoot. "The law does not consult geometry, Adrian. It consults sacrifice. William offered his life for mine in front of 1,000 witnesses, and a temple older than either of our houses. If you find its judgment wanting, you are welcome to take the matter up with the mountain." The hall went very quiet. Somewhere in the upside-down court beneath the floor, William imagined, a reflected Adrian was also being told to argue with a mountain. Afterward, walking the long corridors back, Maya said nothing for a while, and William had the good sense not to fill the silence. Finally, quietly, she said, "You made an enemy today." "I made him earlier today," William said. "The knife catcher had already done the hard part before I opened my mouth. I just declined to pretend otherwise." He glanced at her. He wanted this, your side, not just the standing there, the closeness of it. "Yes, and the night of the procession." He kept his voice light, but he'd been turning it over since the great hall, the way you worry a loose tooth. 1,000 pilgrims, a temple you could hide an army in. Whoever aimed that blade knew exactly where you'd be, knew the route, knew the timing. He let it hang. "That's not a stranger's knowledge, Maya, that's a friend's." She stopped walking. The honeyed light lay across her face and her drawn-up ears and the small, tight worry she'd been carrying since the courtyard and hadn't set down since. "I know," she said softly. "That is what frightens me, not that someone wants me dead." She looked at him, and for the first time the queen was entirely absent, and only the woman remained. "That whoever it is has been smiling at my table the whole time." "Well," said William, offering his arm with the reckless cheer of a man who has already been stabbed once this week, and figures the worst is behind him. "Good news. You've now got exactly one person in this palace who's definitely not smiling at your table for the wrong reasons. He's terrible at protocol and his earpiece thinks everything is an onion festival, but he's yours." Maya looked at the arm, looked at him, and took it. They began, as most doomed and excellent partnerships do, in an archive. It was buried 3 levels beneath the palace, a long vaulted room where the honeyed light did not reach, and someone had compensated with lamps that gave off a cold blue glow and a faint hum, so that reading down there felt like studying at the bottom of a very organized ocean. The records of the court were kept on thin sheets of something that wasn't quite paper and wasn't quite metal, filed by a system that Maya understood completely, and William not at all, which meant she read, and he mostly held things and asked questions that were, by his own cheerful admission, either brilliant or extremely stupid, with no reliable way to tell in advance. "Here's one," he said, holding a sheet to the blue light. "Why does the procession route change every year, but this year it changed twice?" Maya went still. It what? There are 2 root filings for the homecoming. One from 3 months back, one from 11 days back. Somebody rerouted you. He turned the sheet so she could see. Late, quietly. And whoever did it put you exactly where the crowd was thickest, where a person could stand close and a knife could disappear. She took the sheet from his hands, and he watched something in her face harden into a colder, clearer shape. I did not order this. I didn't think you did. He leaned back against a shelf that was probably priceless and definitely older than his entire home planet. That's the thing about being an outsider, Maya. I don't know what's supposed to be here, so I notice what is asterisk. You've all been reading these your whole lives. You read what you expect. I can't expect anything, so I just read what's written. He tapped the second filing. Whose seal is that? She looked, her jaw tightened. The Master of Rhodes, which means either he did it or someone used his authority. Both are frightening for different reasons. That was the shape of their days after that. Maya knew the world. William saw it sideways. She would explain a custom and he would immediately ask the one question the custom had been built to prevent anyone from asking, and half the time the question went nowhere and half the time it cracked something open. They developed a rhythm, a shorthand, an ease that neither of them remarked on because remarking on it would have made it a thing, and it was much safer as a not thing. There was, admittedly, the incident with the disguise. The trail led to a merchant quarter in the lower city, a warren of steam and spice, and shouting where the Master of Rhodes was rumored to keep certain accounts he did not file. Maya could not exactly stroll through it wearing a crown and a face that appeared on the currency. So a plan was made, and the plan required William to pose as a spice buyer while Maya posed as the earpiece, at the critical moment. Chose the word asterisk chattel, which caused a diplomatic incident with a fruit vendor. 3 minutes of the coldest silence William had ever survived, and Maya threatening under her breath to have the earpiece tried for its crimes. It said asterisk associate asterisk, William hissed, over a stall of something that smelled like cinnamon and regret. I distinctly told it to say asterisk associate. It said, Maya replied, smiling murderously at a passing guard. A great deal more than that, and you will spend the rest of your natural life apologizing. But they got the ledger. That was the thing, under the bickering, under the ridiculous hooded cloaks, they worked. She created the distraction, elegant and total. He lifted the account book from beneath a floorboard he'd noticed only because a floorboard in a rich man's back room had no business being that worn. They came out of the merchant quarter breathless and filthy, and for one bright moment as they ducked into an alley to catch their air, laughing, really laughing, foreheads nearly touching, the stolen ledger pressed between them. 2 people who had absolutely no business being this happy while committing light crime against the state. The laughing stopped at roughly the same instant for both of them, when they noticed how close they'd gotten. There was a pause. It had weight. Maya's ears caught the low light of the alley, her mauve skin gone dim and lovely in the shadow, and William was suddenly and acutely aware that his heart, the cold one he'd flown 4 star systems to move, had been moved some time ago and had neglected to send him the paperwork. We should, Maya said. Yeah, said William, not moving. Read the ledger. Absolutely the ledger, that's the priority, reading it. Neither of them read anything for a moment. Then they both stepped back at once, too fast, and Maya smoothed her cloak with the intense focus of a woman reorganizing her entire interior life, and William examined a wall as though walls were a new invention he found fascinating. They read the ledger back in the blue-lit archive, shoulder to shoulder, being extremely professional. The Master of Rhodes had been paid, that much was plain. But the payments came through a chain of hands designed to lose a follower, and each name they untangled only pointed to another, further up, closer in. It was well past the middle of the night when William reached the final entry and went quiet. What? Maya said. He turned the ledger toward her. The last payment, the one at the top of the chain, the hand that had set all the other hands moving, bore a seal she knew as well as her own. Because it nearly was her own, It belonged to the Western Holdings. Adrian, she breathed. Adrian, William agreed grimly. Then, because someone had to, and because the not thing between them was suddenly the smallest problem in the room. So, good news is, you were right to hate him. Bad news is basically everything else. The trouble with a seal, Maya explained, pacing the archive with the tight fury of someone who wants very badly to break something valuable and is too disciplined to do it, is that it proves a hand was used, not whose hand used it. Adrian's mark on the ledger was damning and useless in equal measure. Enough to convict him in her heart, not nearly enough to move against a lord of the Western Holdings, a man with allies, wealth, and a great many nobles who would take his fall as a threat to their own necks. So we need him to move, William said. We can't corner him with paper, we corner him with himself. You are suggesting we let a man who has already tried to have me killed try again. I'm suggesting, William said, that a man that careful only gets careless when he thinks he's winning, so we make him think he's winning. She stopped pacing. She looked at him for a long moment in the cold blue light, and William watched the Queen and the woman have a brief silent argument behind her eyes, and watched the Queen lose. It is a good plan, she admitted, and I hate it, and I hate that it is good. The plan was this: they would appear to fracture. William, the off-world nobody bound to the crown by an accident of geometry, would seem to overreach, to grow arrogant, grasping, insufferable, a low-born fool drunk on borrowed height. Maya would seem to tire of him. Adrian, watching, would see the binding weakening, would see his rival isolated and his queen alone, and would move to seize the moment he'd been engineering all along. And when he would move into the open, where paper couldn't protect him and a mountain-old law could. It required William to be publicly, spectacularly awful, which several members of the court privately felt he'd been managing already, and which he threw himself into with a relish that Maya found, under the circumstances, a little too convincing. He was rude at dinners. He gave opinions on matters of state he did not remotely understand. He stood too close to the throne and let his hand rest on its carved arm as though testing the fit. Nobles whispered. The whispering was the point. And Adrian, beautiful and patient and certain, began to smile again. He came to William 4 nights later in a gallery high above the sleeping city, alone, which was the first mistake of a man who does not make them, and told William everything he needed to know. Adrian was warm. That was the horror of it. He spoke to William as one practical man to another, offering him a way out, a ship off-world, a purse fat enough to buy back every star system he'd crossed and a dozen more, all in exchange for stepping quietly aside from a binding he'd never asked for, and a queen who, Adrian was so sorry to be the one to say it, had begun to find him an embarrassment. You don't belong here, Adrian said, kindly, terribly. You know it. She knows it. The only man in this palace who doesn't seem to know it is you. He set a hand on William's shoulder the way you'd steady a friend. Take the ship. Let me carry the weight you were never built for. I have wanted to carry it a very long time. You've wanted to carry it, William repeated. The weight, the crown-adjacent weight, you've wanted that a long time. Longer than you've been alive, off-worlder. Long enough to reroute a procession, pay a master of roads, put a knife in a crowd of your own people and let it fly at your own queen. The gallery went very quiet. Adrian's kind, terrible face did not change, and that was how William knew he'd guessed right, not from a flinch, but from the total, glassy absence of one. You'll never prove it, Adrian said softly. No, William agreed. But you'll never stop either. That's the thing I finally worked out about you, Adrian. You don't want the throne. You want an asterisk stand beside it. You want what the binding gave me by accident and you couldn't earn on purpose. And a man who wants a thing that badly, for that long, will always reach for it again. Which was exactly the moment the betrayal landed, but not the one Adrian had planned. Because Maya had not been sleeping. Because the fracture had been a performance for the court but never, not for 1 hour, for each other. Because William had told her where he'd be and when, and she had brought witnesses, not guards, Not yet, but the master of Rhodes himself, taken quietly that afternoon and offered a single mercy in exchange for the truth, and 3 of the oldest nobles in the realm, the ones whose houses predated even Adrian's, standing now in the shadows of the high gallery with their faces like closing doors. They had heard it all. Adrian understood in an instant, and to his credit he did not waste time on disbelief. His hand left William's shoulder and went for the blade at his own hip, and this was the part of the plan William had privately dreaded, because plans are clean and knives are not, and he had a very fresh memory of what the second thing felt like going in. "Adrian," Maya said, stepping from the dark, and her voice stopped the gallery like a held breath. "Don't. Not because you'll fail, because I would like for once to see you choose the thing that costs you everything and do it anyway. Just once. It might be the only worthy thing you ever do." For a moment, one long, strange, terrible moment, William thought it might work. Adrian looked at his queen, and something old and starved and almost human moved behind his beautiful face. Then it closed, and he lunged not at William, not at the nobles, but at Maya, because if he could not stand beside the crown, he would at least be the last hand to touch it. And William, who had crossed 4 star systems to feel something, and had been feeling entirely too much of it lately, threw himself forward one more time. He got there. That was the difference this time. The first time he'd moved on instinct, blind, a tourist reacting to torchlight on a blade. This time he knew asterisk, and knowing bought him half a heartbeat, and half a heartbeat was everything. He didn't try to catch the knife. He'd learned his lesson about catching knives. His ribs still filed a complaint about it every morning. Instead he caught Adrian, the whole reaching arm of him, and turned, using the man's own hunger against him, all that forward want, so that the lunge meant for Maya folded into empty air and William's shoulder, and the 2 of them went down together onto the cold gallery floor in a graceless heap that no court poet would ever agree to describe. The blade skittered away across the stone. One of the old nobles put a foot on it, unhurried, the way you'd step on a coin. And that was more or less that. The end of a long conspiracy came not with fire or armies, but with a lord of the Western holdings pinned beneath an offworlder in a very expensive shirt, both of them breathing hard, while 3 ancient houses watched in a silence that would, William understood, echo through the court for a generation. There was no arguing with what they'd all just heard. Adrian had reached for the crown in front of the only witnesses in the realm his name couldn't touch, and the mountain-old law he'd sneered at would have him now. "You could have taken the ship," William told him from very close, still catching his breath. "Honestly, it was a good offer. Terrible plan, great offer." Adrian said nothing, but William saw it, the thing that had moved behind his face in that last moment before he lunged, the starved and almost human thing, settle at last into something quieter. Not peace. Adrian was not built for peace, but an ending. He'd spent his whole life reaching for a place beside the throne, and he'd finally, permanently arrived at his relationship to it, which was to be carried away from it in chains. William found, to his own surprise, that he couldn't quite manage to hate the man. It's hard to hate someone once you understand exactly what they wanted and exactly why they'd never get it. They tried him in the torchlit courtyard. That was Maya's choice, and it was a deliberate one. The same black stone temple carved into the mountainside, the same drifting golden pollen, the same 1,000 pilgrims who had watched a stranger fall bleeding at their queen's feet. She would not hide the wound the court had suffered. She would close it in the open, in the light, in the place it had been opened. William stood beside her through all of it, in the spot the binding had given him, and this time when the nobles looked at him, he could feel the recalculation running the other way. He had caught 2 blades for their queen now. The dog, it seemed, had earned a place at the table after all. He caught the eye of one of the ancient lords, who inclined his head a precise and grudging degree, which from a man that old was roughly the equivalent of a parade. Afterward, days afterward, when the courtyard had emptied and the pollen had settled, and the palace had returned to its ordinary drowned honey quiet, Maya came to find him on the high gallery, the same one, because she had a queen's sense of symmetry and a woman's refusal to be afraid of a room. "I have something for you," she said, and held it out. It was his backpack. 3 shirts and a water filter, exactly as he'd left it a lifetime ago, faintly ridiculous in her mauve and luminous hands. "I told you I'd get it back," he said. "I am not finished." She set the pack down between them, and then she said the thing he could tell she'd rehearsed, because her ears had gone very still and her chin had gone very level. "The binding cannot be undone, I know that, but it can be released asterisk. There is a right. It is old and it is rarely spoken of, but it exists and I have found it. I told you I am extremely good at finding things. You could walk the right and take the pack and go. No debt, no law, no court. You would be free of all of it and of me, and I would let you, William, because you never chose any of this. A knife chose it. And you deserve, at least once in your life, to choose." He looked at the backpack. He looked at the courtyard far below, where he'd bled, where he'd meant to feel something and had instead nearly stopped feeling anything at all. He looked at her, the queen who had knelt in the pollen and the dark for a stranger, who had spent a morning trying to free him from herself, because she thought it was fair, who was standing there now offering him the door with both hands and her heart very visibly wedged in it. "Here's the thing about that cold heart I flew 4 star systems to move," William said. "Turns out the trip worked. Not the view. I never even got a good look at the view. Someone kept stabbing me during the scenic parts." A breath of a laugh escaped her, and he held on to it. "It was you. It's been you since you asked me why with my blood all over your hands and I didn't have an answer. I've got one now if you still want it." "I want it," Maya said, not quite steadily. "I did it because some part of me already knew, before I knew you, before the law, before the court, before Adrian and the ledgers and the world's worst undercover fruit shopping trip." He nudged the backpack gently aside with his foot, out of the space between them, and stepped into the space it left. "I'm not walking your right. I'm not taking the ship or the door or the very generous parole. I'm choosing it. On purpose. By worthiness, geometry be damned." He grinned, reckless and certain and entirely, finally at home. "Also, my earpiece still thinks we got married at an onion festival, and I'd hate to make a liar of it." And Queen Maya, sovereign of the mountain, mender of the wound, the most beautiful thing he had ever thrown himself in front of, laughed and reached up and took the stranger's face in both her hands the way she had that first golden night, except that he was no stranger now, and the only thing spilling between them was light. The backpack stayed. So did he. Some fates change for the worse. His, it turned out, had changed the moment he decided it would be rude to just watch. Friends, we've reached the end of Queen Maya and William's story. Don't forget to hit the like button, leave your thoughts about the story in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. Until the next story, take care, goodbye.